Fellow Dominicans, residents, visitors, and well-wishers, I address you today against the backdrop of a dangerous precedent that is being set in our country, whereby expressions of views by some is accompanied almost always by street protests, lawlessness, and violence. Dominica is being black-eyed in the regional and international world by media reports of this very un-Dominican behavior that is creeping into the mainstream of society. Earlier this week, members of the Dominica Police Force were forced, once again, to restrain themselves and, by so doing, expose themselves to the real and serious threats of injury to their person and the destruction of private and state property as a result of uncontrolled, mob-like behavior by political party activists doing the bidding of their leaders. None can forget the disgraceful scene of February 7th this year, when many of the same people who attempted to storm the Parliament of Dominica last Tuesday caused millions of dollars in damage and marred the beauty of our historic capital city of Roosevelt. Indeed, it was not lost on independent observers that some of the same characters were not far from the scene of Monday's road blockage and other insidious behavior in the village of Salisbury. All this is pointing to a very sad and sorry picture emerging that, if allowed to go unchecked, could lead to dire consequences in the not-too-distant future. The government of Dominica takes a very dim view of this unfortunate trajectory, which, it is to be noted, has hitherto been foreign to our political and cultural landscape. There have been differences of opinions before, and political parties in the past have had reason to vent and express their displeasure with or opposition to acts by or policies of the authorities. But never in our history have we had crime and violence being the first course of action by an established political party. The portrayal of Dominica as a melting pot for confusion and antisocial behavior is hurting the image of the country and threatens the social and economic well-being of our land. On this occasion, the pretext for taking to the streets and demonstrating once again is built around draft legislation slated for consideration during the current sitting of Parliament. The second reading of a bill in Parliament provides opportunity for all parliamentarians, elected and nominated, to speak to the proposed measures and voice their concerns. It is customary practice, and indeed has been the norm over the past 300 years, for concerns of parliamentarians to be embraced and evaluated. Convincing arguments are taken into consideration, and there is scope during the second reading for deferral of action or for amendments in what is known as committee stage. The point that must be emphasized here is that street protests are normally the last resort of most responsible, mature opposition parties in the Caribbean and the world. If you come to Parliament and you do not believe that your concerns have been taken objectively into consideration and acted upon, then by all means, an opposition party has the right, and it is the practice for it, to resort to other means of getting its point across. But to adopt a posture of civil unrest as a first resort, even before articulating your concerns on the floor of Parliament, is unfortunate and constitutes a major departure from accepted best practices and norms in modern civilized society. Such behavior is foreign I insist, to the Dominica way of life and operation. In this instance, the leader of the opposition made known his objection to certain provisions of the draft legislation, and the government was and still is eager to hear these specific concerns. During general election campaigns, it is customary for generalizations to be thrown around without deference to truth, facts, specifics, and objectivity. But modern parliamentary norms and practices call for a greater level of tolerance and forbearance, and for well-established processes to be embraced and allowed to take their course. The proposed amendments to the Elections Act of Dominica have been long in coming. Indeed, such changes have been lobbied for by the very opposition United Workers' Party that is today seeking to prevent them from being considered by the Parliament of the country. The Electoral Commission reviewed and approved of the proposed changes. The proposed changes have also been examined by regional and international agencies and found to be compliant with modern requirements. The government is ready to set forth its position on the matter and is eager to hear the perspective of the opposition. Clearly, if there are strong, useful, and relevant observations or objections, these would be acted upon. And as I said before, there are provisions in the conduct of Parliament for matters before the House to be withdrawn, referred to a select committee, or significantly amended in committee stage. But Parliament is where opinions collide, and not from sidewalks or through acts of violence. Meaningful dialogue cannot and will not take place in Parliament or outside against the backdrop of street protests, intimidation, lawlessness, and violence. This is the third time in the last 3 months that the tolerance and forbearance of the Dominica Police Force have been tested. A single drop of blood on the streets of Dominica is, for me, a drop too much. But how long can the police allow this to happen? How long can the police subject itself to personal threat and injury? I put this question to the Dominican public. But as Prime Minister of this country, I do not see the need for this type and level of behavior by the opposition elements in our country. It is not necessary, and it is very dangerous. It was my intention to embrace legitimate concerns of the opposition and perhaps defer action on the bill in Parliament until such time as bipartisan committee of the Parliament would have had an opportunity to deliberate on the draft and make known its concerns and recommendations. That is how parliaments around the region and the world function and operate. But here in Dominica, it seems different because of a new style of leadership from certain quarters. I will not expose members of Parliament, staff of the Parliament, the media, visitors, and other interest groups to threats of physical danger by mob-like rioters acting at the behest of the leader. Dominica has too painstakingly built its image and reputation for peace, civility, and tranquility for me to join with others in sullying that good name. Accordingly, I have today advised the Honorable Speaker of the House that Parliament should reconvene as agreed tomorrow morning, but adjourned without further consideration of matters of the other paper. This is the best way, I believe, for us to avoid obvious confrontation that others are seeking. Failure to pass this and other laws in a timely fashion is not too high a price to pay for minimizing the threat to life, limb, and property in Dominica. The government is not intimidated by the threats of violence. Let it be very clear to everybody. Equally, however, we are not disposed to exposing innocent Dominicans, and indeed members of the same potentially riotous mobs, to potential harm and danger. When the threat of danger to humans and damage to property has been contained or stamped out, the sitting shall resume. One may ask, why not hear the opposition before a meeting of Parliament? The short answer is, that is not the way of this particular opposition party and parliamentary opposition. Members of the public would recall a recent national event at which no lesser a topic than the economic future of this country was being considered. The entire parliamentary opposition was invited. Did they attend? Did they send a position paper for consideration? The opposition had copies of the proposed changes for several months now. There have been public debates on electoral reform for several years now. Where are the proposals from the opposition? Where are the written proposals if they say that they're very serious about electoral reform in our country? But the reality is that the current parliamentary opposition in Dominica has chosen the path of confrontation and antagonism over constructive dialogue and mediation. Parliament is the place for national discussion and debate, and therefore the floor of Parliament is where an opportunity will be provided for the opposition to articulate its concerns in debate that will, as usual, be carried live and direct into the homes and offices of Dominicans. The government of Dominica shall approach this debate with an open mind, and any and all legitimate areas of concern and or objection voiced by opposition will be analyzed in an open and objective manner, with a view to arriving at consensus, however and wherever possible. But there shall be no shouting match outside the precincts of Parliament, and given the approach of this particular opposition to date, it would be a waste of time seeking constructive dialogue in a structured environment. That simply is not their way of doing business. In the meantime, the government will continue its ongoing practice of sensitizing the nation to the aims and objectives of measures before the Parliament. And in the case of the draft amendments to the Elections Act, the government shall use the available time to continue to discuss its provisions with the various stakeholders in the hope of arriving at a final product that meets the approval of all objective, rational, and reasonable thinkers in the country. Of course, there are those who will oppose, come what may, and that is the reality with which one will have to grapple. However, the suspension of the sitting of Parliament tomorrow, due to persistent threats of violence and lawlessness by supporters of the parliamentary opposition, should provide the said members with adequate time to fully set forth their position on this matter, so it can be taken into consideration and acted upon by the government. My fellow Dominicans, ladies and gentlemen, I wish to stress that the government of Dominica is dismayed by the specter of riotous mobs threatening the lives and well-being of parliamentarians, staff of the Parliament, the media, and the members of Parliament, of the public. We see no point in fighting fire with fire, or in this case, reacting in a manner that could result in injury, death, or damage to property. The preference of the government is to avoid confrontation, in the hope that common sense and reason will prevail, and that there can be a return to the type of leadership standards to which this country had gotten accustomed and for which it is characteristically known. I would like to take this opportunity to caution the opposition in this country to desist from heightening the tensions in the country, especially tomorrow, Friday, when our children will resume the very crucial and indeed stressful Grade 6 National Assessment exams. As a matter of fact, the reason why there is no Parliament today is simply because of the start of the National Assessment exams, so that our students could sit the exams in a peaceful and quiet environment. I pray that nothing will be done by those who should know better to disrupt the orderly conduct of both the Grade 6 National Assessment as well as regular commercial activity in the capital city of Roseau. May God bless you all, and may He continue to shine His light on our beloved Dominica. I thank you very much.